Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope all is well with you all. I know we got them storms out there, but I wanted to touch on a couple of articles that, came across my mind. I always ask the Most High to help me to remember things so that I don't forget. But I don't know how many of you remember the levee failures in New Orleans, and I'm going to show you that there is an entity out there that is responsible for the design of these levees. And this same entity, if you trace them all the way back to when they were formed, you're going to see that they're in the hands of the bankers, they're in the hands of those who are in control, and they do create a flawed system that causes other people to suffer. And what they do, their name always comes up when they have to do with flooding most of the time, or drought or something like that. So I just wanted to show you all, who this group is based on what I've been noticing over these past years. So we know in 2005 the levee failure in Greater New Orleans was caused, they said, by Katrina. So let's read what Wikipedia have to say. On August 29, 2005, there were over 50 failure of levees and flooding walls protecting New Orleans, Louisiana, and its suburbs following passage of Hurricane Katrina and landfall in Mississippi. The levee and flood walls failure caused flooding in 80% of New Orleans and all of St. Bernard Parish. Tens of billions of gallons of water spilled into vast areas of New Orleans, flooding over 100,000 homes and businesses. Responsibility for the design and construction of the levee system belongs to the United States Army Corps of Engineers. The responsibility of maintenance belongs to the local levee boards. The Corps hands components of the system over to the local levee board upon completion. When Katrina struck in 2005, the project was between 60 and 90% complete. Four major investigations were conducted by civil engineers and other experts into an attempt to identify the underlying reason for the failure of the federal flood protection system. All can concur that the primary cause of the flooding was inadequate design and construction by the Corps of Engineers, the same United States Corps of Engineers. These guys right here. And then it goes on to talk about there were 6 breaches in New Orleans, and I'll leave this link about the failure down in the bottom. So it tells you where these breaches were, okay? So I wanted to touch on that just to show you that this group, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, name keeps popping up every single time. It says in the 10 years following Katrina, this is just an investigation, the Levee investigation, over a dozen investigations were conducted. There were no federally ordered independent commission like those ordered after the September 11th terrorist attack and after the BP oil spill in the Gulf. Now I wonder why. The only federally ordered study was convened and managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal agency responsible for the flood protection's performance. A major independent study was conducted by the University of California at Berkeley. A second major study was sponsored by the Louisiana Department of Transportation, led by Ivor Van Heerden at Louisiana State University. Studies were also done by FEMA, the insurance industry, the National Research Council, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Katrina Consolidated Lawsuits. All studies basically agreed on the engineering mechanism failure. So here it is, we got the United States Army Corps of Engineers, known failure group, right? All of them agree that these people were responsible. Now notice they put the fox to guard the henhouse. The only federal study was convened and managed by whom? The Army Corps of Engineers. The same people who basically designed the levees to fail and cause flooding. Now, all them people, if you remember, Louisiana was booming. Louisiana was a place of prosperity. Louisiana was a place just like Houston before the hurricane came. So I want you to keep that in mind. Okay? Now let's go to Houston. I'm going to read something here by David A. Stockman. Now this is an article. Let me make sure I highlight where I'm supposed to be. Right? David A. Stockman, right here, the Contra Corner by David Stockman. 15 trillion gallons of Canadian goodness. And he has a question. So it's 15 trillion gallons of Canadian goodness. And he's talking about this flood, hurricane, and all of that, and the stuff that goes on before. I'm going to leave a link to this article also. He says a powerful lesson with respect to this truth. Okay. Let's see what he's talking about before that. He says, so the reason to focus on Hurricane Harvey's 15 trillion gallon deluge and the nattering bits of Canadian idiocy is it has elicited among Wall Street economists is that it is a metaphor for the broken window fallacy that lies at the heart of government and central bank policy all around the world. To wit, true prosperity and growth arises from gains in free market efficiency and entrepreneurial innovation, but the impact of state policy, especially its central banking branch, is everywhere and always to promote inefficiency and block innovation. Stated differently, in the economic sphere, the state is reactionary. It gets captured by lobbies and economic players with a vested interest in preserving the status quo or in artificially directing economic resources and activity towards their investments, not the best, highest uses determined by the free market. So here it is. I'm going to read this part. A powerful lesson with respect to this truth is happening before our very eyes today as the Army Corps of Engineers has forced to open the Addicks and Barker's Dam 17 miles west of downtown Houston, thereby knowingly and deliberately destroying potentially thousands of homes downstream. Now, think about this for a moment. This was 12 years ago where these same people created dams that destroyed over 100,000 homes and businesses, flooded New Orleans. The same group and the same group that investigated or controlled the investigation of the crime that they committed. It says this seemingly unaccountable action is taking place because the alternative would be even worse, namely uncontrolled flooding in the communities around the reservoirs. Why? Because of the design by the very same Army Corps of Engineers, which are now overflowing the banks. At one point, the water level was rising at a half a foot per hour. This is the wickedness that we have to deal with every single day. You put the fox to guard the henhouse. Needless to say, both of these dams were constructed by Washington in the 1940s to reduce flooding along the Buffalo Bayou. If you go back and you read the article in Wikipedia, you're going to see that guess what? Back then, the very same Army Corps of Engineers, right, created a dam, and obviously it was made with flaws. These people know exactly what they're doing because they know that we tend to forget. It was part of the much larger project of channeling and dredging the bayou and turning Houston into a major deep water port via the massive Houston Ship Channel. Now remember, Katrina, Louisiana was also known for its ports, right? Water ports or shipping ports or bringing in overseas material port. Just wanted to say that part. Over the years, literally, tens of billions of federal dollars have been spent to deepen the channel to 45 feet and widen it to 350 feet so that ocean-going ships and tankers can navigate 50 miles inland. During the years since then, of course, a whole lot of GDP has been generated in downtown Houston. Don't forget, a whole lot of GDP right before Katrina was generated in downtown Louisiana, where a whole lot of, I'm going to say, yes, black folks own their land. Right? I'm going to say it. True. That is the truth. Owing to the perception that flooding risk had been sharply reduced, bringing billions of windfall gains to landowners and property developers who got in on the ground floor. Likewise, the massive refining and petrochemical industry birthed along the ship canal are there owing to the Army Corps project, as are the fashionable communities and commercial districts that develop around the reservoir lakes. So here it is. Them guys say, hey, you know, let's go ahead and let's design this thing, make this thing good, make it a nice, fashionable city, community, and everything. And then when the time is right, we're going to need to make money again. We're going to do something. We're going to create money out of this thing. In short, Huston was not created by God, and neither was New Orleans, based on that bowl that they had. They know that it was, when they flooded, it's going to be like a big old bowl, you know, with fishes drowning inside of it. In short, Huston was not created by God. Pioneers of free market developers and industrialists. It was all made possible by the handiwork of the Army Corps of Engineers and the Texas Congressional Delegation. And that reaches way back to the 1930s, when one Jesse Jones, a Texas banker, see, I told you, the bankers, developer, who ran the original crony capitalist pork barrel known as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, provided much of the financing for the Huston Ship Channel. Go back, look at New Orleans. It's the same thing. These guys create a place that they can basically reclaim or flood or do whatever they want to in the man-made disaster. Needless to say, all of this channeling, dredging, filling, banking, contouring and rerouting of Mother Nature's original scheme of things ended up creating a fiendishly complex water management system that mostly worked well enough during normal conditions for the last 75 years. But you know what happens after the money starts to become no good? The infrastructure starts to become no good. But then came Hurricane Harvey, which busted all the parameters on which the water management system had been predicated. Now even CNN is truthfully reporting the unmitigated chaos and perverse feedback and backflows that have been unleashed. If you go and you look at the news on YouTube, this is the same thing that happened in Louisiana. You would see videos of people on top of their cars, and most of them are Negroes. Like I said, I have to say, and these areas are flooded, and you have people who are saying, white people who are saying that the black people are not being looked at like how the white people are being looked at. And America says, hey, you know, racism over. No, racism is in your face. It's right there in your face. And it's not going anywhere. You know what I'm saying? But this is not about racism. This is about the Army Corps of Engineers. In the case of the two reservoirs depicted in the map below, they are now overflowing their banks and wreaking havoc on local residences, as shown in the adjoining pictures. Even as the water released by the Army Corps are surging downstream to inflict even more damage. At length, of course, the impacted properties will be rebuilt and toted up as gains to GDP. Yeah, they will be. That's the reason why the government told them people, hey, you all don't need flood insurance. We're going to give you insurance. So if you don't get flood insurance, they're going to foot the bill on it. But guess what? Our children are going to be hung by a noose around the neck for that too. But that does not gainsay the patently obvious fact that billions of capital and wealth are being destroyed in the here and now. Because when they build it back, it's going to be like Detroit. This is the map that he's talking about. See the reservoirs? They overflow in the bank. And the truth is they're going to destroy all the houses in their path. Look at this thing here, man. Look at this house. Big old beautiful looking house underwater. So all these stuff here underwater, all because the United States Army Corps of Engineers flooded them out. And many of these people didn't get flood insurance because The government told them they didn't need it. This is not a flood-prone area. Y'all don't need it. They were right. But the truth is it's not a flood-prone area, but you all flooded it. That's the truth. More importantly, since it is estimated that less than 15% of Houston property damage will be covered by flood insurance, the upwards of $100 billion that will be needed to rebuild these areas will mostly come from current and unborn U.S. taxpayers, 97% of whom do not even live in Houston. That's right. And the irony of the matter adds insult to injury. The massive spending disaster relief bill, which will be rushed through Congress with hardly a question asked, will be used to rebuild the very developments that were fostered years ago by another batch of federal money paid for by taxpayers who were also not from Houston. That is, the huge Army Corps of Engineers flood control and navigation products that made Houston possible in its current configuration were funded overwhelmingly by taxpayers in New Hampshire, Iowa, and Oregon, etc. That's because no city fathers in their right mind would have stumped up their own nickels to fund these gigantic water projects that always stood in harm's way. Those risks and dangers were especially known in coastal Texas owing to experiences like the Galveston Hurricane of the 1900s that killed upwards of 10,000 residents. Notice that hurricane also leveled Galveston. You see what I'm saying? A very place, like he's saying, those risks and dangers were especially known in the coastal Texas owing. So he says, nor is it likely that they could have extracted the massive levies required from local taxpayers, given that the gains from the resulting development went to the few and would have been paid for by the many. So I wanted to touch on this article to show you that the Army Corps that they done levied money back in the day to build these very same flood system that they're using to flood out, to basically get money from the government again, which is steal from the people again, to go ahead and fund projects to clean up something that they caused. He says, indeed, back in the day at OMB, we were the scourge of the Army Corps and the Water Project Pork Barrel. And before that, we had even tried to help Jimmy Carter defund the worst of them as a junior member of the U.S. House. Our essential argument was that the natural, efficient order of things, even in this industrial aid, did not entail putting a major city below sea level in a hurricane corridor, New Orleans, or building deep water ports 50 miles inland in Houston. But if it was done at all, we argued, it indeed needed to be funded with stiff user fees by local taxpayers only. And I'm going to skip that part. It says, our slogan was take your chances, but pay your money first. Needless to say, Jimmy Carter's veto of the water project bill got overridden by President Reagan's effort to kill abominations like the Red River Project in Louisiana and Arkansas got canceled when Senator Long's vote was needed to pass the tax bill. We also tried to eliminate the counterproductive subsidies embedded in the National Flood Insurance Program, which encouraged development on vulnerable floodplains by disguising the true cost of building there. Needless to say, those efforts were thwarted by the bipartisan flying wedge, even though environmental groups like the National Wildlife Federation strongly supported curtailment. So, you notice that in the day-to-day, because money talks and bull scraps walk, and they say bullshitty walks, that a lot of things that was not supposed to go through are actually went through. So the government actually is being corrupted. Things that they normally was not going to do back in the day, they're doing today. It says, indeed, 2 decades ago, the latter published a study called Higher Ground, which warned that Houston was a disaster waiting to happen, and that the program was so deeply flawed that just 2% of the program's insured properties were receiving 40% of its damage claim. One home in Houston, for example, had flooded 16 times in 18 years, generating more than $800,000 in recoveries for its owner even though it was valued at less than $115,000. Wow. I'm in the wrong business, man. As Michael Grunwald summarized the report, Houston, we have a problem, declared the report's author David Conrad. The repetitive losses from even the modest floods, he warned, were a harbinger of a costly and potentially deadly future. We have seen the worst of this yet, Conrad said. Houston's problem was a runaway development in flood-prone areas accelerated by heavily subsidized federal flood insurance. And I'm going to say this. As a Hebrew, as a Negro coming from the Hebrew race, they always sell these things to our ignorant behind. They always sell these things, pretty them up, and they have the majority of us going in there and buy these expensive places and what's not, and put us in these areas. And some ignorant white folks too go in there, look pretty, and then they sell them to us for ridiculous sums of money. Tell us, oh, you don't need no flood insurance. When you drive around the city, you could see, hey, wait a minute, we're sitting in a bowl down here. And then eventually, a few years later, after the property value reaches the top or the housing market gets ready to peak, guess what they do? They flood the whole area. So you don't reap nothing. So you already don't pay for the house in 5 years. But guess what? You owe on a mortgage, or they probably might forgive your mortgage depending on where you're at. But you owe, you don't spend all this money, you ain't really get nothing. He says, now that Hurricane Harvey has turned Conrad's warning into reality, it's worth nothing that Houston's problem was in part a Washington's problem, a slow-motion disaster that was easy to predict but politically impossible to prevent. Congress often discussed fixing flood insurance to stop encouraging Americans to build in harm's way, but the national flood insurance program is still almost as dysfunctional as it was 19 years ago. It is now nearly $25 billion in the red, piling debt onto the national credit card. Meanwhile, cities like Houston, as well as New Orleans, which Higher Ground identified as the national leader in repetitive loss 8 years before Katrina, continue to sprawl into their vulnerable floodplains, aided by the availability of inexpensive, federally supported insurance. In other words, we're going to insure you against the problem that we create so that we can tax your children to oblivion. Hurricane Harvey is not the first costly flood to hit Houston since that 1998 report. In 2001, Tropical Storm Allison dumped more than 2 feet of rain on the city, causing about $5 billion in damages. Two relatively modest storms that hit Houston in 2015 and 2016, so small they didn't get names, did so much property damage, they made the list of the 15 highest priced floods in U.S. history. But Houston's low-lying flatlands keep booming as sprawling subdivision and parking lots pave over the wetlands and pastures that used to soak up the area's excess rainfall, which is how Houston managed to host 3 500-year floods in the past years. We fully understand, of course, the modern welfare state democracies are explicitly engaged in organized larceny in the push and pull of the perennial pork barrels embedded in operations like the Army Corps Water Project and the National Flood Insurance Programs. But absent the Keynesian broken window fallacy, it will be at least obvious that these programs are a zero-sum game at best, not a motor force of honest economic growth. Now comes the 15 trillion gallon inundation, which is a horrible thing for the 3.4 million citizens over the decades have been lured into domiciling their lives, properties, and investments in the Keynesian project of Houston. But the incredible proposition that this will result in economic gains rather than huge permanent deadweight economic losses is exactly why the geniuses of the Imperial City are now fixing to attach a $100 billion Houston bailout bill to a measure lifting the nation's $20 trillion debt ceiling to pay for it. Yes, something broken this way comes, and it's a lot bigger than the tens of thousands of broken windows now underwater in Houston. David Stockman, man, he never seems to not amaze you. So, I wanted to also read an article right here in Georgia, and this was way back in 2007 when we had the drought. I want to show you the wickedness and the sinisterness of this Army Corps, man. It says the state of Georgia, stricken by months of drought, confirmed Friday that it would sue the Army Corps of Engineers. Why? Governor Sonny Perdue had said Wednesday the state would seek an injunction forcing the Corps to stem the flow of water from Lake Lanier, Atlanta's primary water source. The Corps administers the lake, which supplies most of the water to Georgia's capital and feeds the Chattahoochee River, which winds through the three states. Rainfall in the area is about 15 inches below normal for the year. Atlanta Mayor Shirley Franklin said, this is dire, severe, extreme drought. Now, it's funny, man. This is a man-made created drought, just like it was a man-made created flooding in both Louisiana and in Huston currently. In the city of Atlanta and surrounding counties, outdoor watering is banned except for a few commercial uses. The state is looking into which businesses would be forced to cut back water use. The Army Corps of Engineers said there's about 3 months supply of water left in Lake Lanier, which is 15 feet below its capacity. The Corps, under agreement reached in the 1980s with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the state and downstream users, releases 5,000 feet of water per second from the dam between the man-made lake and the river. So here it is, the very same Army Corps of Engineers been releasing water from Lake Lanier, 5,000 gallons now, 5,000 feet, of water per second, right? And sending this thing here downstream to Alabama and other places, right? And cause a man-made drought where the government officials of Atlanta had to go ahead and sue for this. And matter of fact, they were levying us, driving our water bills and stuff up. People getting $250, $300, $400 fines for using water based on the fact that the Army Corps of Engineers was causing the problem all along. The figure was based on Florida hydroelectric power plants needs, as well as concerns for endangered species in the river, including mussels and sturgeon. So people in Atlanta, in Georgia, where I live, the mussels and the sturgeons were more important than us, man. They needed the water more than us. But officials from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, officials, so officials from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife official assholes, told CNN that no one knows exactly what flow is needed to keep the mussels or the sturgeons alive. Wow. Perdue calls the current water flow policy a nonsensical action. We shouldn't have to fight this out in court, Franklin said Thursday. We don't want to hurt the cities and businesses downstream, but we'd like to see some middle ground and hope people will join with us. But even if agreement is reached soon, the mayor said her city, which has doubled in population since 1980, needs to do a better job of conserving water. So now, just like the carbon tax, just like we breathing carbon dioxide is causing the environment to have climate change, we need to do a better job conserving water when the Army Corps of Engineers is wasting 5,000 feet of water per second. The residents need to do a better job while they waste water. Governments are not there to help you people. Governments are in the way. They're the ones that are causing these problems. They're the ones that are robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're the ones that are the reason why we as a people can't go. They kill innovation. That's what they do. Atlanta is spending $4 billion to fix the city's water infrastructure. According to Franklin, 40% of the city's pipes, many of which date back to the 1890s, leak. You're spending all this money and you're saying that they leak and stuff. And the reality of it is guess what? Half of the money ain't going to go to where you say it's going to. I can guarantee you that. And I know that around 2010, 2011, our water bill started going up by $15 a year. That's the truth. This is the reason why all these disasters, when people losing their home, is because of companies like the Army Corps of the engineers, which the government that you people go out there and vote for, create these little places based on what the bankers tell them to do, and these are the entities that cause the disasters, man-made. I remember when I was living in Stone Mountain, a different area, and they sent me a letter that I need to be prepared for natural disasters, whether natural or man-made. And the drought was right. That was right after the drought. That was right when they sent me the water bill, and the water bill was going up $15 every time. And here it is, up to this day, the very same company that caused the problem in Louisiana has caused the problem right there in Huston. I just wanted to share these facts. Check this out. Houston, Texas, 41% of all housing are owned by the people them there. If you go back and you check Louisiana, you're going to see that the number was similar. It was I think it was actually more like 50%. So out of all of Houston, all of Texas, in Houston alone, 41.36% of the people own their house. 54th highest in Texas. You see what I'm saying? That's a high percentage of people that own their house. And guess what? The houses are underwater right now. Anyway, I just wanted to share this information with you. Please share it with as many people as you would like. If you like the information that I'm doing, please subscribe to my channel and also give me a thumbs up. And I'd also like to hear from you in the comment section if you'd like to. And I'd like to say, to each and every one of you that are out there and in Florida and the rest of these places, look out for stuff like this where the Army Corps of Engineers comes in, And I'm going to probably do another video in the future to let you know if you see FEMA in your area, just know that a disaster is already coming there. Don't even think about it. As long as you see FEMA, you run to the store, stock up on whatever you could stock up on. Even if you got to buy a canoe or something, just know that a disaster coming in your area. Anyway, I'd like to say shalom, shalom to you all, and be easy. One love.